Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I am Xavier Smith, and today I'm going to talk about how to fully graph a translation of cosine. We are not doing a negative a value here, though, so you'll have to go watch my other video on that. So, let's start. Just normal graph y equals cosine x to start with. So we have our unit circle. Again, we need 5 main points to get the curve. We don't need no pi over 2 over 2. We don't need to graph that. We just need 5 points. We need 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. So 0. So on cosine, we are looking for the x value. So when we plug in a 0, we get out 1. So 1. Then pi over 2, we get 0. So pi over 2 is 0. This is to our midline. Then pi is negative 1. 3 pi over 2 is 0. And 2 pi is 1. So then you can add your little arrows on both sides saying that it goes infinitely. And what we see here is we see a u instead of our little sine. So this is sine. This is cosine. So cosine looks more like a u. Remember that it starts at 1 instead of 0. So it starts at, yes, it starts at 1. It starts at the maximum point. So let's talk about some transformations that you can make with cosine. They, as you may see, are exactly the same as sine. So let's go through them quickly. Transformations. Our standard form of cosine is y equals a cosine b of x minus h plus k. Our a, again, is our amplitude, which is its height from the midline, and it starts at the maximum point above the midline. Then b determines our length of a period. Again, the period is 2 pi over b because it takes a full 2 pi for that u to happen, and then it'll restart once the circle goes around again. So the period is the time it takes for a cycle to fully happen. So 2 pi takes a full circle, and then divide by b, which is just our b value. So if our b is 2, then 2 pi divided by 2 would be pi, so our period would be pi. So our cycle length would be cut in half to 2. But if b is 1/2, 2 pi divided by 1/2 is 4 pi, so then our cycle length would be stretched out 2 times. So 1/2, you stretch it out. If it's 2, you shrink it. So our h is our horizontal shift. Remember, it's a minus h, so whatever h you plug in there, you move the other way. If you plug in a pi over 2 and it's minus pi over 2, you move pi over 2 to the right. Plug in a negative pi over 2, it'll be x plus pi over 2, and you move to the left. Then k is our vertical shift, and that k determines where the midline is. Whatever that k is going to be the midline. There is no k, our midline is y equals 0. The k is negative 3, our midline is y equals negative 3. Doesn't matter. Then scale. Our first point, again, we need 5 major points. We'll take 0, pi over 2, pi, 3 pi over 2, and 2 pi. Those points may be changed due to a change in the period or a change in this horizontal shift, but they're all the same points. Whatever your first point's going to be is going to be the maximum point, like the amplitude above the midline, then it's going to go midline, then amplitude below midline, then it's going to hit the midline, then it's going to go back to the first point it was at. So our scale is our first horizontal shift. Our first is our horizontal shift. So if this was negative pi over 2, then we would be at pi over 2 would be our first. Then our second is 1/4 the period plus horizontal shift. So the plus horizontal shift just means we're at the horizontal shift already, which is the scale. We were already at the horizontal shift. Now is 1/4 times the period. So our period is the full time, the amount of x values it will take to go through a full cycle. And we're already at our first point. And our last point of the period brings us back to that first point or part of the cycle. So we're dividing our cycle up into four. We're dividing our period up into 4 different points because, again, we need 5 main points. So our first one is 1/4 times the period. It's 1/4 of the period from the start point. Then it's 1/2 the period. Add 1/4. Yeah. Then it's 3/4 of the period. Then it's just the period times the horizontal shift. It is 1 times the period. So it's just the period times the horizontal shift. And that one's because, well, you're at the horizontal shift. Don't know why that's a times, that's a plus. So you're at the horizontal shift, and then the period is how long the equation or the graph has to be. So you'll be back at that same point somewhere else. That scale is a little complicated, but all you need to know is that you start at your horizontal shift, then you do 1/4 times your period plus horizontal shift. So you go from that starting point, 1/4 of your period over to the right, and then you'll go 1/2 your period over, then 3/4 your period over, then your period fully over, and you'll have 5 different points. So let's start. We are going to fully transform y equals 2 cosine 4 of x minus pi minus 2. So let's get started. Our amplitude is 2. That means from the midline, it'll go up 2 points and down 2 points at our major points. Our b value is 4, which will mean our period is 2 pi over 4. 2 pi divided by 4 is equal to pi over 2. So our period, instead of our normal 2 pi, is now pi over 2. It was compressed by a factor of 4. Now, our horizontal shift is pi to the right. Then our vertical shift is -2, meaning our midline is negative. Y equals -2. Got to rewrite that. Got to have the negative there. So y equals -2. And then our scale. Let's find that out in a minute. First, let's graph what we know. Midline. Y equals -2. That is the first thing I always graph here, is our midline. Now, we know what point it will start on. Our horizontal shift is pi, but we do not know where we should put pi. We could put pi on this first one. It doesn't matter. And then the next one could be like, 3 pi over 2. Doesn't really matter where you put the pi, but let's just see. So our first point is pi. Then our second point would be the period times 1/4. So 1/4 of the period plus pi. So 1/4 of pi over 2 is 1/8. So this would be pi over 8 plus, if we want a common denominator, it would be pi is really 8 pi over 8. So it would be pi over 8 plus 8 pi over 8 equals 9 pi over 8. So we see second point, 9 pi over 8. Then let's go 1/2 times the period. So 1/2 times pi over 2 plus pi equals 1/4 pi. Nah, I don't like writing it like that. Let's do pi over 4 plus pi. But pi is really 4 pi over 4 when we get a common denominator. So 4 pi over 4, and that would equal 5 pi over 4. If you see what we're doing here, we have pi, then 9 pi over 8, then 5 pi over 4. This is really 8 pi over 8, 9 pi over 8, 10 pi over 8. We're adding pi over 8 each time. So from our 5 points, we have pi. So let's start. This first point, we're just going to call pi, and then the next will go by pi over 8. So pi, then this will be 9 pi over 8, then 5 pi over 4, then 11 pi over 8, and then our last point, because again, we need 5 points, will be 12 pi over 8. So 12 pi over 8 will simplify down to 4 6, 3, 2. So 3 pi over 2. Got it. So let's start. Our amplitude is 2. We already have our midline down. We already have our horizontal shift. That just means we have to start at pi. Then we have our b, we have our period. Our period just gives us our scale. That's all that matters. Oh, our scale is pi over 8. Because if you see the sequence we're going here, we're just adding pi over 8 each time, so our scale is pi over 8. And then that just means the scale that we put here is at pi over 8. So at pi, again, we start at the maximum, the highest point from the midline. And that would be the amplitude is 2, and we're at -2, so we go up 2 to 0. Then at 9 pi over 8, our next point, we go down to the midline. 5 pi over 4, we keep going down in the u, go down 2 because that's our amplitude. So we go down to -4 at 5 pi over 4. Then 11 pi over 8, we go back to the midline. And then again at 3 pi over 2, we have to land in the same place we were at the start because it's our 5th point, and we've gone through our whole cycle. So we go back up to 0. So our graph looks like this. And as you can see, it's a little bit compressed. It's moved down 2. And the last thing you should be able to see here, just to check if your period and scale are right, you should be able to check that from your first point to your 5th point, it should be the period. So from pi to 3 pi over 2 should be pi over 2. So pi is 2 pi over 2. 2 pi over 2 plus pi over 2 is 3 pi over 2. So this is pi over 2, which is our period. That is correct. So thank you very much for watching. I appreciate it so much, and I hope this helped you. Thank you. I will see you next time.